Alright everybody, welcome back to another Ask a Dev Unreal Engine tutorial. My name's Kevin. Today we are going to be talking about animation channels. We're going to be using those to help us create and drive various functions in our control rig so we can give our animators cool stuff to work with. Now, in this case, it's probably best illustrated by example. We are going to be building today a Footroll to go along with all of the reverse foot and everything that we've talked about. This is a pretty standard thing. You may or may not want to use this in your rig. You'll probably want to have a conversation with your animators about that. I'll talk more about that toward the end, but first let me show you what we're building. So here we are in Unreal Engine. We have our Footroll, or we have our foot, and we have our reverse foot in here, and you'll notice now we have some animation channels over here on the right. One of those is called Footroll. The way this is set up is if I dial in a little bit of Footroll, my character is going to roll onto the ball of its foot. If I go a little further, he's going to roll onto the toe and off the toe. If I go negative, you'll notice that my character will rock back onto the heel. This is a very basic Footroll setup, and I thought it was good context for us to take a quick look at an introduction to animation channels and how we might use them. So now that we know what we're building, let's hop right into it. Where are we starting from? We are starting from the reverse foot setup that we built in the previous tutorial. If you have not watched that tutorial, please feel free to go back and check that out. I'll put a link either up here or down in the description. Point is, this is our starting point. And what we want to do is we want to give ourselves the ability to basically animate a Footroll all on the foot control. So in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is we need to add an animation channel. So over here on our right, what we're going to do is with our left foot selected, I'm going to click the plus sign next to animation channels, and you'll notice it drops in a channel. Right now it's defaulting it to a float, which is what we want because we're going to be controlling rotations. And I'm just going to double click this and I'm going to name this Footroll. Now, there are a couple of things to note about this channel that we added. One of them is I cannot get it to go past 0 or below 0 or past 1. So how do we set some of the default ranges and everything we're going to need? Because we're going to need to be able to go positive 180 to negative 180 in order to facilitate an actual roll. So what we can do is over on the left here, if we pick the Footroll, that is the only way to bring up the details for the specifics here. And right now, what we can do is we can set our min and max. So let's set our min to negative 180 and our max to 180. We'll go ahead and compile that. Now we need that because, as I mentioned, we're going to be using this to drive the rotations. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and get our animation channel. So if we drag out from our Footroll and into our control rig graph, you'll notice that it pulls in my float channel, get float channel, and right now the channel is red. If I just click on this, I can choose Footroll. Now, all we are going to do is we are going to connect this in to the rotations of, let's start with the ball, for example. So here's what we're going to do to keep this simple. We're going to take the left ball reverse control and we're going to set the control. Now, what are we going to set this to? We are going to set this to a new transform where we are going to be driving the rotation. So let's make a transform. And the rotation that we are going to use here, and actually let me just make this a little bit bigger for you all to see. The rotations that we're going to be using here are going to be converting this Footroll value into a number of degrees to rotate by. So let's just take this and go Euler with it. So if we use from Euler, we can disconnect this, get rid of this conversion. And the only channel that we want to affect is we're only going to do a single axis. And the axis that we want, you can see when I have the ball selected, you can see it's this Z axis that we're going to be changing. So I'm going to take this foot channel and I'm going to connect it to the Z channel of my from Euler. I'm going to connect that to my rotation for my making of the transform, and I'm going to connect that in. When we do that, our foot freaks out. The reason our foot is freaking out is because we're driving rotations through degrees, but right now our setting control is in global space, and we want to change this to local space. So now when we set it in local space, we're basically using this as an offset to the channels. So here's what we're going to do. Let's test it and see what this looks like. If we dial in a little bit of rotation, you'll notice that our foot roll is already working. That's it. We just created a float animation channel that we can use to drive all kinds of cool stuff in our control rig. Now, we're not done. We got a lot of cool stuff left to do. So right now, we are set up that if we drive this to positive numbers, we will roll onto our ball indefinitely. But if we go negative, we don't do anything. It rolls into the ball. So we need to fix this a little bit. So we're going to put a little bit of logic in here. And the way we're going to do that, let me make this a little bit more room. The way we're going to do that is we're just going to check and see if our foot roll is greater than 0. So first test we need to do is our foot roll greater than 0? And if it is, we're going to drop in an if or a branch here. If this is true, what we want to do is we want to drive our ball control, just like we're doing. All right, if it is false, what we want to do is we want to drive the heel control. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's take this, we're going to duplicate this off. We're going to change the item that we're driving to be our heel control. And if it's negative, we're going to drive the heel control. Now it's going to freak out a little bit, and that is because we have nothing connected. So let's go ahead and connect this in, and we should be good to go. Okay, so just that little change alone makes it so that when we now select our foot, and if we go positive, we still have ball raise. If we go negative, we now have heel raise. Now, there's another thing I want to do in here, because you can kind of see it's come off the ground a little bit. What I've noticed is there's a chance that as it goes negative, you'll notice that if I just go straight negative, it's perfectly on the ground. I think sometimes when you go from positive to negative in control rig, not in actual sequencer, but here in the graph, sometimes it won't get a chance to set the ball back to 0, so it looks like it's a little bit off. So I am going to go ahead, and when we are doing ball heel lift, we are going to set our ball to 0 just as a precautionary measure. So I'm going to duplicate this, drop this down here into the false. This is going to cause a problem. I'm going to make a transform here that is going to be an empty transform, and I'm going to feed this in. Okay, so what this is going to do, so what this is going to do is this is basically going to zero out the ball control in the event that we're negative, and it will go ahead and set the heel control to what it needs to be. That way we hopefully and should get a nice clean transition, and then we can do the same thing the other way. If we are going to go positive, let's go ahead and zero out our heel just to be safe. We can connect this in, and there we have it. So now we have the idea of rolling onto the ball of our foot and rolling onto the heel of our foot controlled by one animation channel. This is really cool. Now, there's a couple other things that we want to be able to do. We want to be able to roll off our toe. So when do we roll off the toe? We want to roll off the toe when we reach a certain threshold. So let's go back to our foot control and let's give ourselves a new animation channel. And we are going to call this the toe break. You can call it whatever you want that makes sense to you or your animators. We're going to call this the toe break or toe raise threshold, whatever you want. I'm going to call this the toe break threshold. And once again, we need to set some default values for this. So in here, the minimum is probably 0. The max, I have to expand this out a little bit. Let's make the max 180 for now. but we want to set an initial value here as well, because if we set it to 0, it's going to start breaking onto the onto the toe right away. It's going to do the toe raise right away. So let's try something like 25 degrees. All right, we're going to set that as our new initial threshold. And when we come back here and we pick our foot control, you should now see that we have our foot roll and our toe break threshold. And it's defaulted to 25 because that's what we've defaulted it to. So now all we need to do to use this is put in one more test. Now that is going to happen up here where we've decided, we've come in here, is our foot roll greater than 0? If it is, then we're going to reset our heel. That's still true. We still want to do that. But we also want to do something else over here. What we want to do is our foot roll greater than, and let's duplicate this, is our foot roll greater than our toe break threshold? And if it is, we want to do the roll on the toe, not the ball. So we need another branch in here. What we're going to do is we're going to create this branch. Now, if it is greater, we're going to do the toe raise, and if not, we're going to do the ball. So our false is it's not greater than the toe raise. So let's go ahead and do the ball. And if it's true, we want to set the values for the transform of, remember, in this case, we're using the toe. So let's set this to the toe reverse control. Okay, and connect that in on true. Now, the value that we want to set this to, much like we did before, we made these transforms from these Euler angles. I'm just going to duplicate this up here just for cleanliness. And we are going to plug our foot roll into the Z channel. And this is actually going to create a little bit of a problem. I will show you in a second. But let's just see if it works first. So if we take our foot raise and we go forward, we raise onto the ball, we go backwards, we raise onto the heel, that's great. Now let's check our threshold. Right around 23, we're good. If we go to, let's say 34, you'll notice it pops way onto the foot, onto the toe. Why is that? Let's go back to 25. 24. Okay, we are definitely seeing the same behavior we were where we needed to compile. Let's go back to 25. Okay, we're right on the ball. Now watch what happens when I get to 26. When I get to 26, look at how far the toe raise is going. That's because right now, look at where we are. We've come in here, our foot roll is greater than 0. Our foot roll is also greater than the threshold, and we're taking the foot roll rotation value and feeding it into the toe control. However, once we break that threshold, our foot roll value is 26. So we're feeding 26 into the toe. So we're going from 0 to 26. We need to correct for the threshold. So we don't want to rotate by foot roll here. What we want to rotate is we want to rotate by foot roll minus the threshold. And the reason for that is we want to start at 0. So look at that. This is going to create a much smoother transition because when we go from 25 to 26, it's going to rotate the toe by 1 degree. That's what we want. So if we come back to our graph and we pick this, now when we go to 28 degrees, it only adds 3 degrees. If we go to 30 degrees, now we're getting more of what we want as far as our toe raise is concerned. So let's compile that. Let's go ahead and save that and take a look at a couple things. So first things first, I find that a lot of times the testing in Control Rig is not as smooth as you might like it to be. So I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to bring up our Anim stage. This is literally just a single cube in a scene that I can drop control rigs into. So if we drop our newly created control rig in here, one of the reasons I like this is because the transition or the control of this is much smoother. Now I want to show you not an issue or a problem, but something to be aware of. You'll notice that when I pick the foot, I don't have foot roll or toe break threshold over here. That's because there's another tricksy thing over here in our animation channels. You'll notice when I pick the foot roll, in addition to the channel name, there's also a script name. we need to set this script name as well. So if we come back here and we choose Footroll, I am just going to double, and it's not super obvious, you can change this because the number, it doesn't look like something you can change, but if you double click it, I'm just going to copy and paste Footroll in there, and I'm going to do the same thing for the toe brake threshold, just to make this a little more user friendly. Let's compile that and save it, and when we go back to our Anim stage, we now have our Footroll and toe brake. Now, the cool thing about doing this on the Anim stage is it's a lot just smoother. We actually get to see what we're doing here. So I think that feels pretty good. However, actually not even however, congratulations, we just did it. We used animation channels in order to create and set up a traditional Footroll on a character's foot. That's pretty awesome. Now, that said, there are a couple things that are worth talking about here. Because we are using the Footroll to drive the rotations of our reverse foot controls, we can no longer animate them in certain cases. So for example, right now, our Footroll is triggering the actual rotations of the ball. So if I were to try to animate this ball, I can't move it. It doesn't move. The reason it doesn't move is because the control rig is overriding the rotations of the ball. Now I can, right now, rotate the toe because the Footroll is not driving the toe, but the minute I cross the toe brake threshold, the toe will no longer work. Wouldn't it be cool if there was a way to fix this or to work around this? And there is. Turns out there is. What we can use is we can use our knowledge and understanding of the hierarchy of our rig so that rather than driving the reverse ball control, what we could do is we could create a couple of null nodes above it, drive the null node above it, and that would leave us free to drive the reverse ball control by hand or manually if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and do that. So here we are back in here. We're going to keep all of this the same for the most part, but we're going to make a couple changes in our hierarchy. And when we do this, this is going to break a couple things. So let's start with the ball first. We'll get the ball working first. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to click on our ball. We're going to right click. We're going to choose a new add null above selected. Now with that null, so now we have a null node that we could potentially use, but I need one more because I need an offset. Remember, we're driving straight rotation channels. If I were to try to drive this, you'll notice that if we compile, the rotations are relative to the parent and they may not be zero. So just as a precautionary measure, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in one more null above the reverse ball. New add null above. And what we're going to do is I'm going to call this one the pose, because this is what I'm going to use to drive the I'm going to drive the pose node with my Footroll attribute, and then that is going to leave the ball control free for me to animate. So one of the things I want to make sure is I want to make sure all of my initials and currents are all 0. As usual, if I take and I create a new control under there, it should be showing up at the ball, which it does, which is great. So all we need to do now is change a couple of things. So up here, where we are setting the ball, here we're setting the ball reverse control. We need to change this to the null. We're going to change this to the null, and we're going to drive the ball reverse control null. Let's compile that. Make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. You'll notice we have our initials, etc. Those are all there. Our control pose is also 0. That's great. And then what we're going to do down here, where we were driving the ball control in local space, we're going to drive the null instead. So let's go ahead and change this to a null, not the null, the top level null. We're going to drive the null that's the pose. So that's going to be the reverse ball pose. All right, so when we compile, everything should stay the same. We should still have our reverse foot control. So we raise, we rock back, all that's working. But we should also now have let's compile and save this just in case. We should also now have the power to animate on top. So let's reset this back down, okay? And double check a few things. So we have, and actually you can already see it working. If we go back to zero all of this stuff out, and just to make sure we are in a good state, what I'm going to do is I'm going to redrop this rig in here, get rid of this take, come back to our content browser, take our control rig with the Footroll, drop it in here. Okay, so we're back at zero. When we pick our foot, if we do our ball roll, we should have all of our foot roll, just like we had before. Now the difference is when I'm lifted onto the ball, I should still have the ability to animate on top, which I do. So I can get nice offsets and everything in here as well, which is really great. So, and yet I still maintain the ability to do all of my foot roll. All right, now we do need to double check. One of the things that we were doing is we were resetting our ball control. We need to change this to the null as well, so that we're zeroing this out. Left ball null. Okay, compile that. And that's in local space. Actually, I'm mistaken. We want this to be the pose. That's the one we want to be doing. We don't want to mess with the null. Now, we're going to do the same thing for the heel. So basically, we added in 2 null nodes above. The very top one is kind of just where it is in space and rotation and everything. That's what we want. Then we have the null that's the pose underneath that we're going to be using. And the reason we did that is because by parenting the pose to the null, all of its rotations are 0. Because it is aligned perfectly with the parent. And then we can use just a straight rotation to drive that. Now, we're going to do the exact same thing with our heel. So let's take our heel, and very quickly we're going to add a null above, and then with our heel again we're going to do one more. We're going to add a null above, and with that we are going to name the second one. Press F2. This is going to be the reverse heel control pose. The one that we want to reset here is going to be our reverse heel control pose. Remember, this is just zeroing it out. We do need to go back up top, and we do need to change our heel to no longer be affecting the control. We want it to affect the null. And the heel control null, when we do that, we should be able to compile. Everything should still be cool. When we come back to our Anim stage, let's just double check where we are. Let's take our foot control, let's reset it. We should now have our foot roll, that's there. We're having a little bit of a pop when we go past the toe break. We're gonna have to fix that. But when we rock onto our heel, and we'll fix that in the graph, when we rock onto our heel, we still have the ability to, oh, actually we didn't actually connect that. Let's go back here. So over here, that's our reverse toe, ball, heel control. So we don't want to set our heel control. What we want to set is the null here. This is going to be the heel null. Compile that. And let's just double check a few things. This is getting set by our foot roll. That is false. This is once again not the null, it's the pose. There we go. Remember, the null is just a placeholder at the top, so save that. There we go. Now we have what we're looking for. And when we pick that, let's just zero this out and test it again. And actually we already have foot roll on here, so our foot roll is working. Got a little bit of a jump in there we're going to have to figure out. So let's go do that. All right, so we're resetting our control pose. And here, this is our toe control and our left ball control pose. Okay, all that looks good. So what's happening is when we're going negative, let me try removing these zeros real quick, just to double check. Interesting. For some reason, zeroing out that transform was causing the problem. That's okay. We'll sort that out in a minute. Let's get the last piece in, which is our toe. So if we go into our toe, we're going to do the exact same thing with our toe, and we're going to add in a new null above, and then one more time with our new null above, and we are going to rename this one to be our pose. And then we are going to do the exact same thing we did up here. We're going to make sure that our toe is setting not our control, but our node null. And the null is our toe null. So that should just compile now. That should be good. And this is the foot left is setting left foot reverse. Okay, that's all fine. I believe we have everything. Okay, great. So that's all good to go. Now back down here, what we need to do is we need to make sure that the toe reverse control is not being driven, but the null is being driven instead. So let's take the toe reverse pose null, compile that, save that. And when we go back in here, if we roll up onto our toe, we still have the ability to rotate the toe on top of that. And that's simply because we were able to separate out the driven nulls in this case in the hierarchy versus the actual controls that are available for the animators to use. Okay, let's do one more quick check to see what is going on with when we zero out our control poses and why that might be an issue. So if we connect these back in, let's see if we can recreate that problem. So first things first, this is when we're driving our heel and it's negative, we want to set our ball reverse control pose to 0. And maybe we also need the toe in here as well. This is the ball reverse control when we're going, oh, that's not what we want to zero. We want to zero the heel. That's why. All right. All right, let's get this down to 0. Come back, set this back, and go from there. All right, we have our nice foot roll again. Okay, so now that we have that working, when we go positive, that's fine. We can set our heel. There is a potential that we want something in this true false here to reset the other one so that it's there. And we may also want, in this case, in addition to setting the heel or the ball, we may also want to set the toe. Let's see if we can get that to work. This is going to be our toe pose. And we do need a empty transform for that. See if we get any weird behavior out of this. So that's good. It's interesting that the ball is bending before we get there. So there is something going on with that. There we go. Oh, we had values on our ball roll, our ball reverse control. Okay, so that's working the way we want. That looks much cleaner. Okay, so it was just a case of we had filled in the wrong thing there. We wanted to zero that out. Now, there's one other thing that we potentially might want to do very quickly, and that is we may want to add the ability to control the ball independent of everything else. So if all we do is we take and underneath our toe reverse control, we add a new control, okay, and we call this control the ball offset. Let's call this the left ball offset. What we're going to do is this one, we are, rather than setting the ball reverse, what we're going to do is we are going to set the ball offset. So that is going to happen up here where we do our initial setups. Let's see here. We have our foot IK, reverse foot, cog. Nope, it's in this top graph up here. We have heel, toe, ball reverse, foot reverse. Okay, so let's set this one in here. So we're going to set our control, and we are going to set that to the ball. So let's get this bone. I'm going to do that. I'm going to use the initial. I'm going to connect that up. And you'll notice that my ball offset moves. So back down here in our offset control, if we switch this to a box thick, for example, we can scale it a little bit so that it's kind of maybe a little bit different. And then what we're going to do down here is, rather than constraining to this null, this reverse ball null, we're going to constrain to a control instead. And the reason we're doing that is that will give us the ability to, in any pose, especially important for a passing pose, if we take all of this stuff and zero it out. So let's zero this out. Let's take and zero out our foot rolls, everything like that. So in particular, if we happen to have this foot in a passing pose and we need to drag the toes, we now have the ability to drag the toes. In addition, this is an offset. So if I have the foot selected, what I can do is, if I'm rotated up onto the ball, let me just zero out my translation so you can see this. And if we zero out our ball, gotta get all of this stuff to zero. Get our rotations done. Okay, so now that we're back to something that makes sense. So as I'm raising onto the ball, I still have the ability to come in here and control this ball offset independent of this actual ball control, which I can also use on top of everything else. So that's it. That wraps it up. Now at the end, a little bit less about animation channels, a little bit more about how we can use channels, and a little bit of our understanding of the hierarchy, so that we can give ourselves the flexibility to both drive an animation control as well as still have the power to animate it by hand. Now, something that is worth mentioning about this is probably a good conversation to have with your animators. Reason being is, when you actually create a foot roll control, it seems easy to use, but by giving yourself a foot roll control plus the manual controls, now what you've done is you've actually created two different workflows. So you may have one animator that's working with foot roll, one animator that's working with the actual individual ball reverse controls. Now, realistically speaking, the actual ball reverse, toe, and heel controls have far more flexibility, far more posability, easier to use. The argument is that the foot roll can sometimes be faster, but once you have the foot roll, then you have to add in even more channels to get all of the little cant and sideways movement and everything like that. So rather than splitting your workflow so that if another animator has to pick it up, they're not looking all over the place for how it was done, it's just a conversation that's worth having. So just because you know how to use this and set this up doesn't necessarily mean you should. But the core underlying point here, though, is it's very easy to create animation channels. Showed you how to create an animation channel, how to name it, set its bounds. Also look out for that script thing so that when you're animating it in the sequencer, the channel names actually show up properly. You know, we even made logic within our control rig blueprint in order to decide what we were driving based on what those animation channels were set to. So as always, if you like what we're doing, help us out, spread the word. Check out our Discord. We have those links down in the description down below, as well as our Patreon. And I will see you all in an upcoming video or live stream, usually on Wednesdays. Take it easy.